All right. Thank you. I'll pass this to you. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Prather. I'm the chair of the Staff Senate's Professional Development Committee, and we are happy that you're joining us here for this Lunch and Learn today. And we've got a large group here in person and also a lot of people on Zoom, so we appreciate all of you for coming out and trying to get a little bit more professionally developed. Today we have Josh Taylor. He's sharing a little bit more about the 16 personalities. So I'll share a little bit about Josh and then just pass it over to him. So Josh Taylor brings over 15 years of experience as a higher education and communications and marketing professional. As Assistant Director for the Graham Office of Career Management, he is committed to preparing Gatton students to achieve employment success as knowledgeable, world-ready leaders. Josh began his career as a French interpreter and has held globally focused communications and marketing roles with Disney, Hands-On Atlanta, and Rotary International in Quebec, Canada. Prior to joining UK, Josh was a career counselor and experiential education coordinator at Morehead State University, where he also taught courses in French communications and career development. He holds a bachelor's degree in Spanish communication and French linguistics from the University of Georgia and master's degrees in strategic communication and adult and higher education counseling from Morehead State University. He is actively involved in the Kentucky Career Development Association, where he has served as president. So please join me in welcoming Josh.
Thank you, Laura. Laura, thank you for the invitation to be here today and for that kind introduction. And I want to say hello to all of you. Hello to folks who are joining us online. It's my understanding that there's quite a number of us joining virtually, so I'd like to say hello to you all as well. Folks, ordinarily, I like to move around a lot in a room. I think for the benefit of the folks joining us online, I'll try to stay limited over here. Folks, if I go off camera, I'm still in the room. I'll try to stay in this zone. I didn't know what to expect in the way of turnout. I think I had imagined that we might begin having more of a get to know one another. I think there's far too many of us for that, but I take that as a good thing. So we're just gonna dive right on in. I work with business students here. As Laura mentioned, in my previous institution, I worked at Morehead State, where it was my responsibility to work with students from across that campus. But one of the things that I appreciate most about what career counselors do is help students understand how to combine who they are with what they want to do. And I'll set the stage for our talk today by showing you what a career counselor's motive is and how this idea of personality type theory fits into that conversation. So what I tell folks that a career counselor wants to do is three things with a student. The first thing that we do in my office is help students understand who they are. I call it learning who you are. And as I'm going to show you, there are multiple pieces of that puzzle that you want to look at. Personality is one of them. The second thing that a career office is going to do is help a student plan where they'll go, help them connect the dots to what they're going to do with their major, get internships, experiences abroad, joining clubs and organizations and so forth. And finally, an office like mine helps students get where they're going. Today's talk is very much in that assessment piece where it's about learning who we are. And I gather by virtue of you having seen the announcement about this Lunch and Learn talk and you've arrived here, you know a bit about personality theory or you want to learn something about personality theory. So I'm thrilled that that's the discussion that we get to have. Again, when we talk about the way that our personality impacts our career choices or the way the multiple dimensions of ourself impact our career choices, I again want to show you today we're just focusing in on personality. But in an office like mine, these are the four primary things that we look at. How's someone wired? That's personality. That's what we'll talk about today. We also work with students to understand interests. How do the things that we're interested in intersect with the way that we move forward with our career? What do we value? What are we motivated by is another way to think of that. And finally, our skills. But again, today we're just going to keep the conversation limited to personality. Now, there are multiple tools that folks use that look at personality theory. MBTI is perhaps the best known. For the scope of today's event, I'm going to be inviting you by the end of this presentation to take what is called 16personalities.com. So make a note of that. That's the assessment that you're going to have access to following our talk. You'll go to 16personalities.com. And folks, here's the beautiful thing. It will not ask you to sign up. It won't ask for an email address. It is truly an open platform. It is beautifully user-friendly. We lean on it quite heavily in the Graham Office of Career Management. We also use the MBTI. That's when we take a little bit of a deeper dive in a one-on-one scenario with a student. But when we work in large classrooms, or just like today's event, 16 Personalities is the tool that we use. It's very similar to another tool that you might be familiar with, Trudy Typefinder. Now, all of these have in common, they're all born from research that first, frankly, began with Freud and then went on with Carl Jung about 100 years ago. Now, Catherine Briggs and her daughter, Catherine Briggs Myers, really pioneered the theory that we're going to be looking at today, and that goes all the way back to the 40s and the 50s. But if you've heard of the MBTI, know that the tool that we're using for our purposes, 16personalities.com, is frankly, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm certified and trained in all of these, to me it's a lot like at this point Coke, Pepsi, RC Cola. It's really bringing a similar philosophy to the table. So what you'll gather from 16personalities.com is going to give you the same 4 letters that you would receive whether you took MBTI, 16P, or Trudy. All right, are we on the same page as far as that's concerned? All right, and folks online, I gathered that the sound is working, everything fantastic. All right, well, we're just going to dive in. So, and by the way, folks online, it's my understanding that you're going to be given the same document that folks in this room have, so it's going to be shared with you. It just compresses all of the information onto a 2-page sheet. It's my understanding that you all will have that. So folks in the room, if you've got that sheet, use that to follow along. As we talk through, you're probably going to be able to deduce where you fall on all of these dimensions. And then when you take the assessment and you see the results, it's likely that you will have, based on what we learned today, be able to predict your type in advance, okay? Now, there are 4 key elements to the way personality theory works. It's as if the personality is divided up into 4 key chunks, and on each side of that, you're gonna be presented with almost an either-or choice. And I'm gonna talk us through, it's not quite as black and white, one side or the other, as it might initially seem. But I will say it's 4 key elements, 2 alternatives to each side. We throw that up in the air. That means that this can land in 16 distinct combinations. All right? And when you get your result, you'll find out which of these 16 personality types most closely matches the way that you are wired. Now, for example, the first dimension that we look at is where we like to send our focus or how we get energized. It's called extroversion and introversion. Of the 4, it's probably the one that you've heard of before. I want to say right now, we all extrovert at times and we all introvert at times. We all use both. And an analogy to offer to you, sorry about that. An analogy to offer to you is our handedness, all right? So, and in fact, as we speak, this microphone I'm managing with my left hand, the clicker I'm managing with my right hand. I am a right-handed person, but I use my left hand every day. Of the 2, one of those functions is more natural for me, certainly when it comes to my handedness with my handwriting, as an example. I offer this analogy to help you understand that we all do both, but when you look at the 4 dimensions, one of them will be a little bit more you than the other, perhaps. Or in cases, it might be very pronounced. Hey, I am quite this and very little of the other. Some of you might find that you're almost what we in personality type theory call mid-zone, where it might be hard to know which letter is more you than the other. But, and it's beyond the scope of what we can talk about today, but I will submit to you that the folks who are behind all of these theories really do believe that our wiring, it's brain-based, and it's wired into us much like handedness. So I have a silly little quote there that I made up to sort of prove the point. I don't think folks, might start off in life right-handed and then at some point into their adulthood revert into being left-handed. It's not really like that, right? And I don't have any conscious choice of choosing to be right-handed. I don't imagine that when I was a child and I was reaching for the crayon, I sat there and decided which hand am I going to use, or I don't think anyone had to teach me to be left-handed. When I speak to folks, right-handed. When I speak to folks who are left-handed, who are a minority of the population, most of them have always told me, no, I didn't choose to be left-handed. It's just naturally how I'm wired, right? So I don't want to belabor this point, but I always offer this as a little bit of a framework to understand how these two sides of one element work, okay? And by the way, folks, at any point in this, if y'all have questions, please raise your hand, get my attention. I'm happy for this to be as conversational as it can be. Before we really dive in, one other piece of information I want to offer you that can kind of give you context for how this works. How many of you all have siblings, brothers or sisters? Most folks, online folks, most people in the room have raised their hand. I also have a younger brother. His name is Andrew. He's 3 years younger than I am. I'm going to show you a bit of a dated picture. It goes back maybe about 5 years. But this is my brother. And I also have to say, I don't know what's going on with this awkward face I'm making. But whatever. I like to think that I smile during a picture. But that's my younger brother, Andrew. He lives in Boston now. The reason that I'm showing you this is that his wife, Ruth, my sister-in-law, we were up there visiting. My husband and I went up to visit them in Boston several years back. Ruth, when I'm at their house, say that I'm the first one up and I'm making coffee, she sometimes will come into the room and for a moment think, oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were Andrew. And she had this idea. She said, what would happen if we did a face swap with you two? And so this is actually a face swap. Now, Andrew's just as bald as I am. He just doesn't like to keep it as short as I do. So that's me looking at the screen. That's me on the right, and yet with my brother's face, and then vice versa. Now, I don't think you could get this past my mom, but Ruth had the idea, let's send this to Ben, Josh and Andrew's dad, and see what he has to say. So Ruth made this face swap. She screenshot it, sent it to my dad, and he's like, yeah, looks like y'all are having fun in Boston. I'm from Georgia, by the way, and that's my dad talking. And he's like, yeah, y'all have fun. Y'all be careful. Didn't even notice, right, that this face swap had happened. Now, why do I bring this up? My brother and I look a lot alike, but we are different on all 4 pieces of this dimension that we're about to look at. And my parents could have told you that when we were this little. We have been different our whole lives, had much the same upbringing, much the same raising, but we are wired as very different people. Now, what I do for a living works for the way that I'm wired. What my brother does for a living works for the way he's wired. Now, personality type, I can't look at someone's code and say, oh, you're an ESTP or you're an INFJ. You need to go do this and you should do that. Any personality type can do anything. But it does inform the approach that we will take to that given occupation. All right, so I just want to put that out there. All right, so let's dive on in. The 4 pieces of the puzzle look at where we like to send our focus. Another way to think of that is how do we naturally get energized? The second piece of this is going to be looking at how we relate to information, or differently put, what sorts of information best resonates with us. The third piece is how we choose to make our decisions, or what we value when we make a decision. And last but not least, how we prefer to approach the outside world, or differently put, how we like to keep ourselves organized. Those are the 4 pieces of how we are wired. And what's fascinating is that the science and the research suggests that it is wired into us. It's wired into us. Now, we can change as we grow and mature. Our ability to comfortably function on the other side of the scale can adapt and mature and change. But our key preferences do stay the same. So let's look at the first piece of the puzzle. This is where we like to send our focus. And as I mentioned a moment ago, you might have heard of this one, extroversion and introversion. Now, in the popular consciousness, folks often get this a bit misunderstood. In the popular understanding of these terms, introversion might be thought of as this means that you're shy or awkward, or perhaps you don't like people. That could be the case. But from this theory's point of view, that's really not what introversion is about. But let me start with extroversion. Folks who prefer extroversion, that's the way we tend to say it, are energized by people, places, and things outwardly. The focus is outward, and when the focus is being sent towards other people, places, things, and activities, it gives them energy. It gives them life. I imagine it like a cell phone battery that is being charged. It gives energy to send the focus outward towards people, places, and things. Introverts, on the other hand, folks who prefer introversion, tend to be energized not in that way, but rather by sending the focus inward. So that could imply quiet space, time alone. Those sorts of functions are what charge their batteries. When you are operating on the other side, it could potentially drain you. So if you prefer introversion, you might function very, very well at a big party, a gathering. All of that doesn't imply that you are awkward or shy. You could be, but it doesn't imply that you're awkward or shy. It just simply means that you are moving now into an arena in which you have taken your phone off the charger, and the capacity for that battery to drain has now begun. Does that analogy work? And then just flip it for the other side. All right. I've got a few visuals. These visuals are from the folks at MBTI to sort of put this into perspective. And a few indicators to help you maybe make, at this point, an educated guess or an instinct about which of those letters is more you. Now, when you get your report, and it would be just the same with the MBTI report, this all exists on a continuum. It's going to show you where on that continuum you fall. Some folks will find our very pronounced preference for extroversion. Other folks we might find have a very pronounced preference for introversion, and some folks are going to be mid-zone. It's almost like being ambidextrous. It's 51-49. I'm comfortable with both. So this absolutely exists on a continuum. So it's not just that you're I or that you're E, but you'll see in your report how pronounced is your I, how pronounced is your E. With me so far? All right, I'm going to keep doing that. That's the first slice of this. Any questions before we turn the page? Yes. That's an excellent question. That's an excellent point. And so, yes. Okay, thank you for that. So the question is there perhaps a difference in how one might choose to function at work versus at home? Am I characterizing that correctly? So yes, the answer is our natural function might be one, but our responsibilities at work require us or sort of push us into a different way. You'll know what your preferred, the folks at MBTI, I love the way they put this, they call it our shoes off self. Your shoes off self is the indicator of what your core preference might be. Meaning if you're at home, your shoes are off, you don't have to answer to anybody or anyone, and if you were to be able to get to completely call the shots, what would be your natural preference? But indeed, our work lives sometimes require us or challenge us to operate in ways that are a little bit outside of how we might naturally prefer to be. That's absolutely true. Any other questions? This is a snapshot of where the general population falls on this. Slight majority, 51%, it's almost 50-50. 51% of the general population tends to prefer introversion. 49% of the general population tends to prefer extroversion. That split is sometimes surprising to folks. I think culturally, certainly in the United States of America, the default expectation might be for extroversion. That's my impression anyway, and I see some nods. Yes. No. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, does this tend to vary with age? The answer is no. All right. Now, folks, the next two pieces of this, all four letters matter, but the next two pieces are really the core of our personality type. So the second piece, this is S and N. S for sensing, N for intuition. By the way, 16P, when you go there, you might notice that sometimes they code the markers a little bit differently. Rather than use S for sensing, they call this observation, but S and N in either case. Sensors, this is how we look at information. If you prefer S, if you prefer sensing, it's likely that you prefer to think about things in a direct, hands-on, logical, factual, tactile, even kind of way. You prefer information that you can see, count, weigh, measure, but experience directly in some sort of way. Folks who prefer S tend to be more direct, more logical, more hands-on, and more interested in the details, okay? Now, on the flip side, if you are intuition, if you approach information in that way, it's more likely than not that you prefer to think of things in abstract, creative, imaginative ways, and might be more interested in the big picture and less interested in the details directly in front of you. Sensing folks are more naturally able to zoom into a problem, and the intuitive person is going to more comfortably zoom out and look at the problem, if that's a helpful way to think of it. I've got some visuals there. S folks, a bit more sequential, a bit more direct. Intuitive folks, N folks more interested in the snapshot. Here's some more indicators. You've got similar indicators on the flip side, I believe, of your handout to help you get a sense of, does one of these feel a bit more me than the other? And if you're mid-zone, it's going to be a little bit of a tougher call. Now, nearly 3/4 of the general population tend to prefer sensing. About 1/4 of the population tends to prefer intuition when it comes to the way that they approach information. So far, so good? All right, in the interest of time, I'm watching the clock. The third, and this to me is to me one of the most interesting of the four, as it potentially relates to personality misunderstandings or personality conflicts. But this is how we make decisions, or differently put, what we value when we go to make a decision. This is called thinking and feeling. It's important to note, thinkers feel and feelers think. I don't want there to be a misunderstanding about that. But what is our natural default? What is more comfortable? What do we prefer? The word preference is key. Let's talk about thinkers. Thinkers value objectivity, competence, logic, the facts. When I can logically look at a situation and know what the facts tell me, I can comfortably make my decision. That would be easy and that would be comfortable for a thinker. Feelers, on the other hand, it's not that they don't value an objective approach to a situation or the facts, but rather they really value the empathy involved in a situation, the human element of a situation. How does this impact me? How is this going to impact you? How will this impact the group? And all of that becomes a very important piece of the decision-making process for the feeler. If we look at these images, we'll see that the thinker stands outside of a situation. A feeler might feel inclined to try to get into a situation to better understand it. We do both and we need both. One of them, I'll say, might be your preferred default. This, when we talk about what we have to do at work, this definitely presents itself in workplace situations. We might need to step in or lean into an approach that's more befitting the situation, and it may or may not be what our natural instinct is. Doesn't mean we can't do the other side. I can use my left hand. I'm using it right now. So, here are a few other indicators of the distinctions between folks who might prefer thinking versus prefer feeling. And if we look at the general population breakdown, we find that a little over half, 60% of the general population tend to prefer feeling as it relates to the decision-making process. 40% of us prefer thinking. So by now, you probably have a sense of E, I, S, and N, T, and F. All right? We're now going to look at the fourth letter, J and P. I like to use the terms J and P here because the semantics of these words can get a little bit loaded, particularly with judging, judgment, judger. I want to try to distill any tension about how loaded that word might sound. Has nothing to do with being judgmental. In fact, I heard on the news today Judge Judy is retiring. Have any of you heard of that? That next season is going to be the final season? All right, so in honor of Judge Judy announcing her forthcoming retirement, let's think about what a judge has to do. They have to make a decision, okay? So think of that when you hear this word judgment or judger, it's about deciding. It's not about being judgmental in that other sense of the word. Okay, but this is how we approach the outside world, or differently put, how we prefer to manage ourselves in relation to the outside world. So let's look at J first. I'm just going to call it J. I'm not going to try to get into the how loaded that word feels. But if you prefer J, it means that you are likely to prefer structure, schedules, organization, being timely, all of those things. You like to know the plan, you like to know it in advance, and all of that makes you comfortable. Okay? P folks, on the other hand, all of those things might make your blood pressure go up. You might like, hey, I want things to be flexible, spontaneous, go with the flow. I'll decide later. Why would I decide now? J folks like things to be decided in advance. P folks like, why don't make me decide now? New information could come along. I will totally be comfortable deciding this later. So all of those things come into the mix for J and for P. If you are someone who knows that on a vacation that you'll take 3 weeks from now, that on Tuesday you have dinner reservations at a particular restaurant, and you've already been online and you've looked at the menu and you know what you'll choose for your appetizer, I really believe that you will see Jay on your report. And ma'am, I see you shaking your head. I saw you shaking, so that must not be you. Can we assume, does P feel more comfortable for you? Well, admittedly, and to be fair, I was sort of making a dramatic, right? So, but who knows? Some in the room might want to know what they're eating 3 weeks from now. All right, so this is J and P. This one's interesting, and this one you can really also spot in your coworkers. One of the folks here was asking about team dynamics, and this is something that we can start to recognize in the colleagues with whom we share our space. Right? So again, J folks, in the grand scheme of things, tend to prefer structure, routines, schedules, plans, decisions. Folks who prefer a P approach might prefer to approach things more spontaneously, flexibly, open-endedly. Let's look at this later. And there's value in that for the person coming at it from the P perspective. In the general population, the folks at the MBTI tell us that about 54% of the general population tend to turn up J. 46, so we're close to a 50-50 here. 46% of the population tend to turn up with a preference for P. Okay? So far, so good. Do we have a snapshot understanding of these 4 letters? So these 4 letters come together and fuse into which of these 16 types most closely align with you, okay? Now, it's important to know that when these 4 letters collide, something unique happens 16 different times. And what I mean by that is, I'll go ahead and tell you, the letters that I tend to prefer are I, N, F, and J. And I almost wish that I could say that I was mid-zone in any of those, but I'm actually quite pronounced in terms of my preference all 4 times, I, N, F, and J. And that's actually, let me pause and say, one of my directors at my previous institution, he could not understand that I'm introverted because I do enjoy public speaking. These sorts of events I love. I don't think that I'm a shy person, and I love public speaking. But my internal cell phone is off the charger right now, right? So at the end of the day, I will very much value like going home, lighting a scented candle and reflecting and like getting lost in my daydreams or what have you. But I need and want, indeed need that downtime. Doesn't mean that I don't enjoy what I'm doing right now. But anyway, since I do enjoy crowds and I do enjoy talking and I'm a bit animated, my director was like, well, that clearly makes you an extrovert. And so I'm like, no, it's about energy and it's about focus, right? Anyway, I say that to say this. So I am INFJ. My husband is ENFJ. And when I was getting trained in this years ago, so I, of course, had him take the assessment. And he was like, oh, so we're exactly the same, except I'm the extroverted version of you. And the response to that would be no, right? It's not that he's the extroverted version of me, but it would be maybe an understandable assumption to make because it's the same letters except for one. But if you'll, and I'm now betraying the extent to which I like to think of things as in an in way, because in folks like metaphors and they like analogies. So I'm going to give you a metaphor here. I think it's a metaphor or an analogy. But if we were to think back to kindergarten when we might have been mixing paints, if you mix the colors, it fuses into something new, right? If I were to take blue and yellow, it's not as if when we mix it, the blue and the yellow rub up shoulder to shoulder. They actually join and create something new. So when these letters collide, it creates something new 16 times. Now, are there going to be commonalities that you might share with people who share 3 of your 4 letters? Yes, and Willie was right in that regard, but it is also different at the same time. That's kind of confusing. Did that make sense, what I just said? I see some nods. Okay. So folks, these and the little terms that were given, the architect, the executive, these are borrowed from 16 Personalities. So when you go to 16personalities.com, you'll see that there are these code names, if you will. And by the way, even when we look here and see, these are some sort of, the chances are that this might describe the way you function. But it won't hit it every time. INFJs tend to be quiet. I'm not sure that I'm a quiet person, but I get where they're going with that. But anyway, that's me. I'm the INFJ. By now, you probably have a sense of which of your 4 letters are going to turn up in the report. Okay? Now, before we go a little bit further, I do want to show you this. One of the unique contributions to this theory that come from the folks at 16personalities.com is that they have added a 5th letter. And that 5th letter is A and T. I won't go too deeply into it now, but you can dive into the deep end of the website if you choose. But to put it simply, as we see here, assertive and turbulent are what A and T stand for. And if we had defined the previous 4 pieces of the puzzle as where we send our focus or how we get energized, what sorts of information we best approach or relate to, how we make our decisions, that was the 3rd piece, how we approach the outside world, that's the 4th piece, and then the 5th piece, 16P, calls a way to think about our identity. And I'll just read the first sentence here. If A is the letter that you find attached to your code, A folks tend to be self-assured, even-tempered, and resistant to stress. Not bothered, water off a duck's back. Something happens, someone says something to me that was rude, not terribly bothered. If T winds up on your code, turbulent individuals, on balance, tend to be more self-conscious and sensitive to stress. All right? That is a glimpse of what A and T are about. I do find it an interesting contribution to this theory, but know that when you get your report, it will say ESTPA or ESTPT, but it will be like dash and then tack on that final letter. Okay? So that's the 5th letter in a nutshell, but the core of this theory remains those first 4 letters. So when you go to 16personalities.com, I want to repeat and assure you that there's no trickery. You do not have to register. You don't even have to give an email address. It is a gorgeous website. It's actually built from a company in England. They have tons of research behind it. There are a number of platforms, open sourced free platforms that folks could go to get a quality personality assessment. We at the Graham office, have carefully vetted this one. We really do believe in it, which is why we're happy to use it. But you'll go to the website, you'll take the assessment. When you take the assessment, folks, please understand that there are no right or wrong answers. No one personality type is better than the other. Indeed, each of these 16 types have strengths that are more attuned than any of the other 15. And on the flip side, we might say that there are blind spots or weaknesses that might be pronounced with your type, more so than the other 15. But it's all about understanding how we're wired, leveraging that to our best advantage, and relating better with the people in our lives, whether they're friends, coworkers, acquaintances, or what have you. But you'll go to 16personalities.com and then it will show you a full report. And in fact, let me see if I think, yeah, we're good on time. I'm going to see if I can link to this and show you. All right, so you'll take the assessment. So we're going to find out that I'm an INFJ. We could drill down into INFJ, and it will give you a full report, give you an overview, what might be likely to be your strengths and weaknesses, how might your personality type manifest itself in romantic relationships, friendships, family life, career paths. It's really, really interesting. And one of the things that I find most amusing, for lack of a better way to say it, is it actually shows you people in both history and pop culture, and even folks in like in like literature or like movies, you know, had Jon Snow from Game of Thrones taken the MBTI or 16personalities.com, we might have found that he had a preference for INFJ. But anyway, there's a lot of fun, cool pieces to the report. But again, the report is really deep and really dynamic. I just wanted to give you a preview of what the website is like. I know that you'll find it very straightforward, very user-friendly. So what I hope one of your takeaways from this is that you'll be delighted to want to go take this personality test, get a sense of, hey, did the letters stack up the way I would have anticipated, and then really read and see what it has to say. Now, these personality types, distinct though they are, certain commonalities that they share can be brought into cohorts. One of the cohorts, 16P, calls the analysts. You'll find that the commonality here is that they all share N and T as a core preference. Now, just by show of hands, is there anyone who suspects that this might be the cohort that they belong to? If you've been following along and tracking what you think your letters might be, I see a few hands. A few folks in the room might belong to this cohort. This cohort, the diplomats, the point of commonality here is that N and F are the shared core letters for all four of these folks. We know that I'm one of those. Does anyone in the room think that this might be where they belong? I see a number of hands. Now, it's beyond the scope of what I can explain to you right now, but you might have noticed at this point, this cohort is a fusion of a little bit of ST, but also SF. There are reasons for that. It indeed goes beyond the scope of the conversation today, but if you're interested, stay after and I can tell you. But these cohorts are called the Sentinels. Does anyone think that this is the cohort that they might belong to? I think the most hands yet have shot up online, folks. The most hands have shot up yet for this group. And last but not least, again, we see a little bit of a mixed bag of how these letters form a common cohort, but anyone think that they might be the explorers? One of the common points here is that P is the fourth letter for all of these folks, the explorers. All right. Now, by now you might be thinking, I now have a theory of why my sister acts this way, or my spouse, or my son or my daughter, or my boss, or my coworker. You might already be getting some insight into workplace dynamics, relationship dynamics. As I mentioned a bit ago, and folks, does this go formally until 1 o'clock? I'm so used as an instructor to, like, when that hand hits near 50, my instinct is to hustle. Okay, so we're good until 1 o'clock. There will be time for questions. Please understand that there is enormous value and strengths that are brought to bear by your particular combination of letters. And the strengths and weaknesses piece of your report please look at that one in particular. So in my work as a career counselor, it's part of my job to coach students on what they're going to be interviewed, on what an interview might feel like. And all of us here know that a common interview question, whether we love it or hate it, but a common interview question is to speak to our strengths and weaknesses. And this gives us a really good starting point to better understand why that's the way that we are and how we can leverage that in powerful ways. It also gives us insight into what we might not do quite so well. It is no secret that one of the things that are common to NF folks, I'm a very strong N and a strong F. Detail orientation is not something that NFs are commonly known for, okay? I know that, right? So it doesn't, when we know our weaknesses, by the way, and this is the career counselor and me now talking, that doesn't give us license to ignore our weaknesses or to take no responsibility for our weaknesses. But I know that if I need to be tracking details, that will not come as naturally to me as I might like, and I'm gonna have to exercise some intentionality on that. Where other things are just very naturally gonna come to me and I can do, that a colleague might have to have more intentionality on that piece of the puzzle than I might. All right, so strengths and weaknesses we all have, and type theory suggests that this is a good window into understanding that among many other functions in our lives. For those of us here now as employees at the University of Kentucky, I don't know what roles you all have. I wish that I could know, like in this moment as I look out around the room. But whatever your function and your role is here on this campus, some of you might work quite independently. Some of you might work very embedded in a dynamic team, I don't know. But wherever that falls, I hope that it's a good fit for how you're wired. And I also hope that it provides you a space to lean on your strengths and also be sensitive to your own weaknesses and better understand the people with whom you work. So I want to show you this. As an example, if your colleague or if your director, if your supervisor, if you suspect that he or she prefers thinking and you need to make an argument to said supervisor, respect the fact and remember the fact that she will appreciate a certain degree of objectivity and logic when that case is being made. Because now, I'm not encouraging you to like necessarily go have your director take a personality test so that you can try to then make some informed decisions. But you might be able to intuit, you might be able to understand or suspect, hey, I work with people that I think are thinkers. And I want to remember that if I need to sell an argument to that thinker, let's bring a little bit of, let's show the logic of why this could work. Now, on the flip side, let's say, for example, that we're trying to make an argument for a new initiative in the way residence life works on campus. We're proposing this new thing for, is anyone here in residence life? I just completely made that up. Okay, so let's imagine that we're doing something about what might work in a residence hall, okay? This proposal, we could either look at it logically, what is going to be the benefit to the student? We could talk about that proposal logically, or we could also talk about, hey, this is how it's going to impact the relationships of the people in the residence hall. So if the supervisor, if the folks having to make the decision are going to be coming at this more of a feeling perspective, talking about narratives of how it impacts the relationships of the students, that's going to resonate with the feeler. Right? The thinker is going to want to hear more about what data does this create for us that can be meaningful and moves the university forward. I'm loosely trying to come up with an example here, but does that make sense? How, again, we're talking about the same thing, but a thinker is going to value that from a different lens than the feeler does. And we can strategically, I might be a feeler. As it happens, I am a feeler. But if my director, who indeed is a thinker, if I need to let Sarah know something or show Sarah the buy-in of why this could be good for Graham, Sarah will be interested in the data points first before she's interested in the narrative warm human stories, right? Let's look at J and P. If your coworker is J, I sensed some J in the room over here. I remember some heavy nods, right? If your coworker is J, remember, that coworker is probably going to want the meeting to start on time. The coworker is going to want, if we have a plan, let's stick to it. If we've made a decision, that decision has been comfortably made. Now, on the flip side, if you have a coworker who prefers things from a P approach, and the two of you have been assigned a task, if you're J and your coworker is P, remember that she or he might have a certain wish or need for flexibility. And if your need for structure, it could potentially create some friction. It needn't lead to friction, but it could. Y'all hear what I'm saying here? So this gives us insight in how to respect and appreciate. One is not better than the other. P is not better than J. J is not better than P. It simply stands that I, as an individual, am wired to approach this situation expecting or preferring this, and my coworker or colleague is approaching the same situation, but his or her wiring is allowing them to approach it from this perspective. And it can really create these aha moments of, oh, we're just doing this differently. Now, it also a little bit goes beyond the scope of our talk here today, but the most dynamic teams, the most impactful teams really do have a mix of all of this. If you throw nothing but S's at a problem, they might not see it from the angles. Throw in a few N's, and now we're seeing it from different angles. Add the E, add the J, add the S, add the P, and next thing you know, you have got different perspectives. And so the more diversity that you can even add to a team from a type point of view, arguments can be made that that can be a really powerful thing. Now, certain professions do tend to attract folks that are wired in a certain way more than others. This leads me back to at the beginning where I said technically any type can do anything. That's true. But you do often see, on balance, hear me when I say this, folks, on balance, if we were to do a sampling of folks who turn out to be engineers in their career, you're going to, on balance, see more STs in engineering than you see in Fs. And if we were to look at social work or counseling, as an example, on balance, you might see more SFs or NFs than you see Ts. That's a generalization, but it is a generalization that's backed up with a lot of data. But again, we're attracted to things sometimes that work for the way that we're naturally wired, okay? What we show students is when they're working on, hey, what should I major in? And then from that, what can I do with my major? We want their decisions to be informed and to be a good fit for how they're wired. That's their personality type. What are they interested in? What motivates them? That's what they value. Some of us are motivated by the need for flexibility and creativity. Other people might be motivated by earning potential or the need to be within a certain range of geography in terms of where they want to settle. We're all motivated by different things. And last but not least, we're all skilled in different ways. Some people might be very skilled with communication. Some people might be very skilled with data and information or technology or tools. But folks who tend to be most successful and happiest in the work that they do, the work that they do honors all four of these pieces. All right? With about 5 or 6 minutes left, that brings me to the end of my talk. And so again, I invite you now from here to go to 16personalities.com, find out your letters, read the report, and then hopefully it's some interesting and valuable information. So that concludes my comments. I'm happy now to open up a discussion.
I just have one question that came from the chat on the A and T slide.
Yes.
If one can be both.
Can one be both? One could certainly be what the report is going to call mid-zone. Yes. So even if any of the letters, including A and T, it could be a preference for 5149. Or this reminds me of a comment earlier, in certain situations, you might find that you can summon a T quite comfortably, and other situations an A might be more comfortably summoned. Yes, is the answer to that. Right.
I wonder if you have a good resource for how to use this information to interact with somebody that maybe you're uncomfortable interacting with, or how to maneuver a little bit better in your job given maybe a mismatch with job requirements. Something that's a little bit more
workplace oriented, perhaps. Yes. In fact, one of the folks with whom I was speaking before the presentation began this could literally be a part 1 to a 2-part talk where we really dive into how do we then navigate the dynamics, whether it's with our friends or family or our coworkers. I'd be happy, and I can speak to Laura. Laura and I work closely together. I can make sure that we funnel back to this group some recommended articles or books, but I can even think of a book now, Type in the Workplace would come to mind. That conversation would be very oriented towards how this all manifests in the workplace. Type in the Workplace. That's a resource that I have on my computer that I think that I could share. I think I misspoke a moment ago when I called it a book. It's an article, I think would be the better way to say it, but I'd be happy to share that. But yes, there are plenty of ways where we can then now take, all right, this is how I'm wired. This is how the person next to me is wired. It is indeed a whole new conversation to begin to be able to leverage that in the way that our daily lives unfold. Any other thoughts or questions? And if not, folks, I just want to say I had no idea whether 5 people would be here or 10 or 15. So I'm thrilled to see so many of your smiling faces and folks online. 40, wow. So, I mean, this has been, I'm very grateful that this was a topic that you wanted to learn a little bit more about. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your attention. I do hope that it's been helpful. And I'd love to, with any of you, josh.taylor@uky.edu is my email address. I'd be happy to tailor some resources to you as we move forward from here. So with that, yes. Oh, I should have said that at the very beginning. This is a microphone that helps the folks online. I'm so sorry I didn't make that clear. Right. I've never used one of these before. Wow. If ever I use one of these again, I should clarify. I'm just taking it. Like I could toss it to you, right? Right. So this has been, this whole time, this thing that I've been carefully holding has been a microphone for the folks online. All right. Thank you, everybody.